Thank you for reminding me. Piece of paper in front of me. And welcome everybody. Thank you guys for showing up tonight. It is awesome to see every single one of you guys. And the question of, why are we here tonight? The Honorable Ron Campbell, who is participating tonight, said, and he was quoted in the paper after his incredibly powerful march this past weekend in downtown Leesburg, he said, if your presence means anything, it's no more rhetoric about what we need to do. We know the changes. We've been fighting for them long enough. We either need to have the courage to do what we say we're going to do or move those aside who don't. And that to me is so powerful in terms of, we've been doing this long enough that we've been talking about it. Let's get together and figure out how we're going to act. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We are Michael and Laura Blacken, and we are the co-proprietors of Temple in the Trees.
Yes. Oh, wanted to let you know who we are, but Temple in the Trees is our home. It's more than that. It's also a spiritual community that we're based in Leesburg, Virginia. And we base our spiritual community on the teachings of Tantra. Our intention is to create an inclusive force for positive change in the world. We're a multicultural, multi-gender, multi-racial community, and we are open to anybody who feels called to walk through our doors. So we're really, really glad that you walked through our door here virtually. What a brave new world this is. So as people are gathering and joining us, what I'd love to do in this moment, just to come into circle with each other, is really just take a moment and see who's here. So wherever you are, and just take a moment, flip through your phone, your screen, and really take a moment to see each other. What we're growing here is an opportunity to be seen and an opportunity to be heard. And in order to do that, we really need to listen. And we really need to open our eyes and see. So I invite you to do that right now with our brothers and sisters and family. Just taking that moment to meet somebody's eyes. So taking a deep breath. Actually, I invite you guys to close your eyes and find your place in the world right now, in this moment. Maybe you're holding the hand of a beloved next to you. Yeah, I do. Just close your eyes and feel your feet or your butt firmly where you are. Everything that we have experienced, everything that we have learned and created that has brought us to this place right here, right now, to make a difference, everything that we've done in our lives have led us to this moment right here. I don't know about you guys, but I really feel that we were born for this, and I want to rejoice in that. I'd like to read to you a poem, just really gently into your being. Keep your eyes softly closed. Maybe place your hand on your heart, or your belly. Wherever you feel you need to just give yourself some softness and some presence. May today there be peace within. May you trust that you are exactly where you are meant to be. May you not forget the infinite possibilities that are born of faith in yourself and in others. May you use the gifts that you have received and pass on the love that has been given to you. May you be content with yourself just the way you are. May you be content and in the knowledge that settles into your bones and allows your soul the freedom to sing, to dance, to praise, to love. It is there for each of us and in every one of us. So feel your bones, your architecture, your structure. Feel your skin. And what words would you write across your heart right now that you would want somebody else to see? Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for showing up to make a difference. Let's begin our circle.
All right, thank you. So we wanted to start just by talking about what our intentions are for tonight. It's really to bring our passion together, right? Every one of you guys took time out of your busy schedule to be on a Zoom. A lot of you have probably been on Zooms all day and are suffering from all kinds of Zoom fatigue. But thank you for showing up. And our intention is to bring that passion to bear to two things, heal and action, right? And that's really been the title of this from the beginning, is how do we help heal what's happening in our nation, and then how do we identify actionable steps we can take that's going to put a stop to the epidemic of racist violence in America, particularly as far as I'm concerned, the violence that is being perpetrated systemically by police brutality. So we invite you guys all to come forward with your ideas, with your experiences, reflections, and you know, my theory here is if one of us does something, if one of us say writes a letter to the editor, or writes a congressperson, or calls a sheriff's office and says, here's what we think can really change things, they'll see it and it'll register a little bit. But if all 46 of us do that, right? It's like that Arlo Guthrie song. It'll be a movement, right? They're gonna really sit up and take notice. So that's really, for me, the goal is what are some of the things that we can all settle on as a group that we can action, that we can do that's gonna really make an impact and move the needle. And so we've got a great program of people who can kind of help us with that. So we'll have a few keynotes to start. And I'll walk you through who those folks are. Incredibly excited to have these people involved with this. So the first one is Dr. Corinna Moebius from Florida International University. She's a scholar who's been studying white supremacy for a long time, white supremacy and the protection of property. A deeper understanding of what's happening now is the title of her keynote. After that, we'll have Q&A for her and then move on to keynote number 2. And that's Amaku Okpong, Spiritual Revolution and Moral Accountability. So she'll give her keynote followed by Q&A. And then number 3 is our local councilman, the Honorable Ron Campbell. He's the person who organized the incredibly successful march in downtown Leesburg that attracted 1,500 people. And he'll talk about how a small group of concerned citizens really can make a difference. After the 3 keynotes, we'll run into what we're calling ideation, selection, and action. So ideation is, raise your hand, take the mic, take 5 minutes to describe what your idea is that you think that if all 46 of us or however many are on the call later can all action upon and do. Bring your ideas. We want to hear everybody. We've got some that we're going to bring to the table, but absolutely want to hear from as many of you guys as possible. Number 2, selection, right? We're going to invite everybody to sign up for something. Maybe everybody will sign up for the same thing. Maybe everybody will have something different resonate out of a small number of things, so we still get good economies of scale. So that'll be the selection of actions, and then we'll figure out the next steps based on what it is that we all select, and then we close. And that's it. That's a simple 2.5 hours together. So with that, let's talk about some logistics. So first of all, almost everybody's on mute, but please, if you're not speaking, stay on mute so that we can keep background noise to a minimum. Raising your hand is a good way to make sure that we know that you'd like to speak, and there's a reactions button on everybody's thing, everybody's Zoom client, that they should be able to raise their hand, and we should be able to see it to take people off of mute so we don't have people talking over each other. And also, please know this is being recorded, and that notes are being taken in the chat as well. So both of the recording and the notes are going to be posted on our website, ourtempleandthetrees.com. And if that's a problem for you, now would probably be a good time to drop. But there will be a recording. And with that, you want the slide up for the logistics and for the agreements, rather?
Yeah, we have a few agreements, and they're simple, but really important. Thank you. As we are here to listen. That's agreement I think we can all get around. We're here to educate ourselves. As Michael was just sharing, we're here to commit to taking action together. And that commitment is to be an ally. And in order to be an ally, one needs to act. So if we're all in agreement with all those agreements, just raise your hand.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. Let me take the slide down. Oh, there's so many more people who have joined us. So welcome everybody. And welcome to the young people who are here. I am so tickled. My son, Alex, has joined us, and so many of our children's friends are here. So thank you so much for the youth who are representing. Yeah.
So yeah. Melinda Russell has raised her hand. Melinda, did you have something to say?
Melina.
I just wanted to thank you guys for putting this out there. I am a mother of Black children. I'm Hispanic, but my children are Black, and I am scared to death for them right now. So thank you for putting this on.
Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Our scribe just wrote, we have, we'll thank her again when she gets back on, but she just lost power. So
yeah, there's a major storm.
I want to bring awareness that if anybody loses power, the door is open, just come back in. Should it shut down on you? If we shut down, please keep going, and we'll join you when we can.
Yep. All right, so up next, Corinna, white supremacy and the protection of property, a deeper understanding of what's happening now. We're going to start with the historical perspective. Corinna, take it away.
Yes, thank you so much. And I want to give a shout out. I didn't see her here. I know she must be here. Maria. My friend Maria was the one who made the connection, and I'm so grateful to connect with you all from Miami. Let me get in here now. Can you see what I am seeing? Can you see the full thing? You don't see the thing on the side, do you? You were able to see the full slide? Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. So what I wanted to do in the limited time that I have right now with you is to go into, we're hearing a lot about property, right? We're hearing certain words that are being thrown around right now, and there are people talking about white supremacy. I want to go into this idea of property and give some historical context for the conversations and the presentations that we're going to hear later. So first of all, though, I want you, throughout what I'm saying, I want you to be thinking about your body and how you think about your body, and how we may have multiple representations of our body out there that we put out ourselves into the world. Our avatars on social media and all that. But we have this flesh and blood body that we were born with, and we may change in various ways, but when we go out into the world, how is that body of ours received? And how do we feel as we walk in that body? And how is that experience different for different people? So think about that, because what I'm gonna be sharing is very much about some of the historical things that have shaped how we have come to think about our own bodies and the bodies of others, okay? So I want to go back. I could go back further, but I want to go back to the Enlightenment. And you may have heard about the Enlightenment in school, but this was this time when you had this idea of governance, and you had the idea of laws, and you had the idea of order, and you had the development of the sort of the modern state, and we're going to have the beginnings of the medical profession and psychology and all these different forms of knowledge going out into the world. But this is also a time when you had, people talk about the Enlightenment, But you also had the transatlantic slave trade going on. So what are these dynamics here? Well, an amazing philosopher, a queer philosopher actually, Michel Foucault, wrote about the shift that was going on like in Europe in the medieval times. When people were considered criminal, what you would do is they would be brutally tortured, often in a very public kind of a way. And this was a way that the king was able to show his dominance and his power over the population. But that started to shift because populations were getting bigger. How do you control a larger society? And now the kings are no longer in charge. You now have this sort of elite that's in charge. So he talks about the birth of the prison. And he talks about these ideas that you have two things going on. You have the creation of knowledge, or the knowledge that becomes valued in society, right? And ideas of who's above who, and think about whiteness is going up here, and all these ideas of racial order. But then you have the power relations that are making that effective. And it's the discipline, it's the policing, it's all these ways to make sure that people are abiding by these rules and these laws and what is considered valuable knowledge. So he talks about the birth of the prison and this idea of the panopticon, and this idea that one of the things that needed to change was that people would start to discipline themselves because they would feel like the guard in the prison was watching them even in their own homes, that wherever you go, you feel like the government to a certain way and other people around you are monitoring you, and therefore you have to learn how to be self-disciplined and self-possessed, okay? And this is really key because it's relating very much to slavery, okay, and the justification of slavery. Because this whole idea of disciplining yourself and being in control of yourself and being in control of your body is related to ideas of controlling Black bodies, African bodies. You have the slave codes and the Black codes that are basically saying that African bodies, that Africans who are enslaved do not have the right over their own body, that they are possessions. They are possessed, and anything that they create belongs to the person who owns them, okay? If they have a child, this is the possession of the slave, the white person who claims to own this human being as property. And that one of the ways that was justified was by saying that sub-Saharan Africans had religions that involved spirit possessions by unruly spirits that could create unruly mobs. And I want you to think about that language, the unruly mob, okay? This was what was used by these Enlightenment philosophers, and that it was in the best interest that slavery should be justified, because in this way, white men would possess these bodies and make them orderly and make them, quote, useful to society. And that was a justification, was you possess humans, therefore they're going to be more controlled and safer for other societies. One of the things that was really concerning, though, to plantation economies and to what's called the plantocracy, though, was rebellions. The Haitian Revolution, slave rebellions were happening across the in the hemisphere and in the colonized world. And you had one of the things that was very concerning was when you had rebellions that involved enslaved and free Blacks joining forces with the working class white folks, basically, and uprising together. You had the 1741 Negro Rebellion. This was involving Irish immigrants. It was involving Africans from different ethnic groups. It was involving Native Americans. It was even involving Afro-Cubans or people who had been living in Cuba and who had come and were living in New York and had been, quote, re-enslaved in New York, all rising up together. That was considered very, very dangerous. And on top of that, in all these different port cities across the Atlantic, you had interracial relations going on in the ports, in dance halls. You had people gambling together. You had people in relationships with each other interracially, friendships, alliances, planning of these rebellions, news being shared. And that was considered problematic. So the people who were defending slavery kept using this narrative of, you got to watch out, because when blacks are on top, when you shift the racial order, it will be this unruly mob. There will be disorder in society. This is very dangerous to society. And so you had these things even used when Lincoln was campaigning. They talked about these ideas of the amalgamation balls, which meant, oh, look what's happening. It's interracial. This is so dangerous. It's going to threaten whiteness. It's going to threaten the white race. So we must do something about it. And this becomes part of this justification of racial segregation as well. Now, one of the things that Foucault gets wrong is that he says that the public punishing and torture in public spaces sort of ends after the medieval times because, but he wasn't thinking about the fact that it was continuing. If you were of African descent, that lynchings and the chain gangs and other forms of what emerges later on as police brutality are ways that this public disciplining in a different kind of way is happening. And if you are an immigrant, and these are these sort of images that were being put out of immigrants coming in, and we have this whole narrative of the American dream and the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island, that one of the things that was being promised was this idea of whiteness. And you do not want to be treated like, you know, non-citizens. You don't want to be punished in that kind of way. If you coalesce together and if you stand against basically Black people and Blackness, that you will get rewarded with a property called whiteness. And whiteness is a property you've probably heard, hopefully you've heard of redlining, and you've heard about the fact that you could get homes and home loans if you were not in a red zone, which was usually these places where you had folks of African Americans living, then that becomes labeled a red zone, and it's harder for you to get a home loan, or you don't get any home loan. The value of your property is less. And so now if you have whiteness and you're able to get all these financial benefits from the government, and then you can sell your houses and you can sell your property, you're accumulating wealth. And then that wealth gets passed down to future generations. And so whiteness is getting a power over time, and racial segregation, legalized racial segregation, puts that into law. Even after, though, official desegregation, whiteness still gives all these kinds of powers and privileges. It does not go away. And so one of the things that's key to that is policing is one of these ways of protecting not only white lives and white bodies, but it's protecting white property, and it's protecting an idea of that you have to separate, that you have to distinguish Black spaces from white spaces and white bodies from Black bodies. And so policing, so when we talk about disorder, or when you hear this conversations about unruliness, think just, for example, I live here in Miami, 1947, in the middle of the night, in the pouring rain, in a night perhaps like you're experiencing in the DC, Virginia area. 35 Black families were forced to move right then and there from their homes for a whites only school. And this is in 1947. So these things are happening in the future, and it's being enforced, unfortunately, by police officers at the service of the state. And meanwhile, too, there's this idea that if you have this whiteness in whatever form that is, or if you want to be accepted, if you want to get these social benefits, you have to discipline yourself. You have to be orderly. You have to conform. You cannot speak up. You can't get involved in the civil rights movement. You can't get involved in Black Lives Matter, because then you will be seen as unruly, and you might risk losing some of those privileges. So think about the ways that we discipline bodies in a way that gets taken for granted. This idea of disciplining our body, the idea of unruly hair, the idea of being in order and what is proper. And so where do those ideas come from? They all have histories. So I want to think about, how can we have courage? Can all of us have courage to think about this, the ways that we have disciplined ourselves, the ways we've disciplined and colonized our minds, the way we have disciplined and colonized our bodies, and how can we be a little bit or a lot of it undisciplined, in the sense that we start to rethink what we take for granted about ourselves and the investments that we've made, and how can we think about that differently and start there within ourselves, start there within our minds, so that we can go out there and make change more fully in the world. Thank you. I can't hear anybody.
I was looking for our unmute button. I apologize.
That's okay.
Great job.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Corinna. It's weird not to hear the round of applause.
It is.
Are there any questions for Corinna?
That was.
I have a question. How can we learn more? I know we don't have a lot of time, but can you put some reference material perhaps in the chat?
Absolutely, absolutely I can. And just so you guys know, I'm an urban anthropologist, and I'm a public historian, and I'm a critical race scholar, because I am undisciplined. I believe in thinking across disciplines. So what I try to bring together is things from multiple disciplines to help us understand things in new ways. And I am working on a workshop series on white supremacy, but not just white supremacy, global white supremacy. I think it's very important, especially us in the United States. We need to think about how global, and I'm hearing too much that is US centric. And I think that we cannot fully understand white supremacy if we don't understand that it's global, and it always has been global. That's not a recent phenomenon.
I see Donna had her hand up. Donna, did you have something to say? Perhaps?
Perhaps. Sorry. My question is about the historical perspectives, and what kind of changes do we need to see in order for those scholars in the future to look back and see the kind of changes we want made?
I think it's already happening. This wonderful woman that I was speaking to today, she was in a fantastic workshop on basically decolonizing your mind. And if you do some Google searches, there are folks in the academic community who are really being very vocal and speaking out. There's an amazing, I'm part of a group of public historians. There's a great resource. It's called Facing History and Ourselves. And these are basically historians that are battling the dominant narratives that that you might have heard in grade school or later about history, and how do we confront these histories. So there's a groundswell, I think, but what's difficult is that the traditional university and college disciplines folks who try to push sometimes against these status quos. And so sometimes folks are not speaking out the way they want to because they're worried that it might affect their getting tenure or things like that. So I think it's important. I'm going to go and share some resources on your page. Absolutely, of some amazing books, amazing scholars and folks that are out there, but there's a lot of conversations about how do we change education.
Thank you. And I see.
What do we value? What knowledge do we value? And I want to say one more thing, and I'm very influenced. I want to give credit to an amazing African and Africana Studies department in at FIU, which is under threat right now as we speak, okay, because of funding and because of COVID, and they don't have enough people applying to their program. And I learned so much from that program. It was tremendously influential on me. So whatever you can support or do, however, but we cannot lose these programs. Everybody should be taking these classes.
Thank you. Sahar, is that how you pronounce your name? So you have your hand raised?
Yes, I was on mute. Hello, everybody. This is my first meeting, and thank you so much for hosting it. Yes, I am grateful for Bob and Maria to direct me to you guys. So it was a wonderful presentation. I have lots of questions, but one thing, is it appropriate and is it effective to change the history's narrative a little bit? And I say it because I am, I consider myself an indigenous from Iran. My brother did ancestry, and apparently we're kind of like indigenous of Iran. I was born and raised in Iran. My children are Black, and being very multicultural and knowing some of the histories that were shared beyond the history book, to me, it feels like that some of these racial tension are part of our DNA memory, possibly, and if speaking anthropology. And was there a time that maybe I call it the races with melanin, and I say it because that's how I refer to it, again, metaphysically speaking. They did have certain power and advantage in knowing the ways of life, and then they were systemically targeted to get disempowered. And even now in our fight for, in our movement to create a new balance, it feels that rehashing the past of the narrative of slavery is still reinforcing that inferior, but that there was a time that many of these indigenous groups had advantage.
Well, not only, if we go back in history, if we look, a lot of folks don't know anything about African history. They just erase that. And when I have more time and in workshops, I go into that. That's very, very important. But it's also important to know that there were people of African descent in Europe who were astronomers. I had a slide, I didn't have enough time today, but did you know that one of the knights in the round table was Black? I mean, the presence of Africans around in many parts of the world, even outside of the continent, is much earlier than people realize. Mm-hmm. And the power of African knowledge and African philosophy and ways of thinking, I think, is so important now globally to think about. There are so many important ways of understanding life and the body and the relationship and connections and these ideas of interconnectedness. I've been speaking with folks who are talking about the power of understanding the impact of the orishas, or the divinities in Yoruba religion and spiritual practice, and how powerful the orishas and the ideas of the orishas have been in a very global kind of way. But again, I do think it's important to understand the dominant narratives and tear them down, like analyze how did these narratives come into play? How did these narratives become normalized? And then say, now let's dig deeper. What were they erasing? Why were they erasing that? What was the motive to erase that from history? Why? And so I think it's important to look at history as a process. There's a wonderful Haitian scholar, Triot, who talks about how the erasure, for example, of the Haitian Revolution, which was so powerful and so impactful globally. And he talks about, we have to talk about not just this is the right history and this was the wrong history. We have to talk about the making of history. How did history get made? And that is part of the story, is the making of history.
So Corinna, we're out of time. Thank
Sorry.
you. No, that was amazing.
Don't ever apologize.
Thank you so much. There's also questions in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind responding to any other questions in the chat, and I'll invite everybody, if you have more questions for Corinna, please put them in the chat and you can get them answered there. But in the interest of time, thank you so much. That was incredible.
Thank you very, very much, both of you.
Yeah.
And again to Maria for making the connection. And to Anna for scribing.
All right, so moving on. Keynote number 2, Amaku, Spiritual Revolution and Moral Accountability. Are you ready?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Woo, history. That was really, really, really great, Ms. Corinna. So yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm here today is really to speak to the spiritual side of what's going on, because that is often not seen. We talk a lot about history, and not even actually history is forgotten, and that's why it's being repeated so often. But we also talk, the focus oftentimes is on politics and changing legislation and things of that nature. But from a spiritual perspective, what's going on and why are we here? And as a practitioner of spirituality, it's everything is spiritual. Everything. The root of everything is spiritual. In my own personal practice, if someone comes to me like, oh, Maku, my leg hurts, it's like, okay, that's spiritual. Let's figure out what's going on. So, and when we talk about, spiritual, we're talking about energy. One of my paths is the tantric path, and tantra speaks about energy. Everything is energy, and also everything's interconnected. And so the way that a lot of us see global events, the uprising, COVID-19, is from a very spiritual perspective. Like, why is this going on now? So the greatest challenges of our time are spiritual. So, we started off this year with this global pandemic, COVID-19, and that in of itself was a spiritual crisis. We've been treating other beings really poorly. And so this disease arose from that in my perspective, and a lot of other spiritual practitioners' perspective. We have the disease that arose from animals, and we've been mistreating the animals. And so we're here now, in our homes, locked down, losing money, global economy falling apart. But 2020 wasn't done. Just when we thought, we were coming out of it, then we have this global uprising centered around racial injustice and white supremacy. And this is also a spiritual crisis, because we're spiritual beings. And so it's really important to look at it in that perspective. Even if you're looking at history and you're looking at politics, looking at the spiritual side, okay, why does this hatred exist towards people of color, but Black people especially, which we're focusing on right now, because of the amount of brutality and the murders that are happening. Not only in this country, but also other countries, but by far America, wants to be the best in certain things. And I think America is really being an exemplar, when it comes to persecuting Black people. But white supremacy is a spiritual disease. The only thing that we don't know, we know history, we know legislation and all that stuff, but we don't know why. Why does it exist? What happened in the past centuries that birthed this spiritual illness, a spiritual, emotional, psychological illness that we're seeing still play out today? And that's a good question for a lot of people to ask. Like, this is to understand that this is a illness, a sickness. Let's be real. It's a sickness of the spirit. And why does it exist? And, you know, everyone is tasked with trying to, or we should be tasked with trying to understand the root cause so that we can solve it. So that being the case, so what kind of revolution do we need? If it's a spiritual sickness, a spiritual disease, then the revolution that we need needs to be one of spirit, needs to be spiritual, where we are changing that part of ourselves, not just changing the laws, because we can change the laws all day, but if people aren't changing themselves, they're going to keep on breaking these laws. Laws are important though, because laws, you know, help ensure order, but it really does start with ourselves, like looking at ourselves as spiritual beings and understanding, why do I feel this way about other people? Why do I want to persecute other people? Is this right? Is this wrong? You know, which way do I go with this? The tantric path and many other spiritual paths are actually asking us to evolve. So when I write, as it's written, revolution, the R is in parentheses because it's spiritual revolution, but also spiritual evolution. And that part is important because a lot of our paths, our spiritual paths, are asking us to evolve. You know, it's really interesting how the president uses the Bible as a weapon, kind of weaponized. I mean, it's really mind-boggling. But if you really study the text, the teachings of a lot of these traditions, they don't promote any of this. They don't promote, you know, one race being dominant over the other. They don't promote any of the ideas that are being promoted today, but are rather asking us to evolve as humans, spiritually, because we're spiritual beings. So we're being asked to evolve, spiritual evolution. We're being asked to also act, spiritual revolution. And that's the direction and that's the focus that many of us are wanting to take. And of course, when in a rebellion, in revolution, everyone has different roles. Not everyone is going to be a frontline warrior, marching, you know, protesting. You're going to have some people who have to do the spiritual counseling and the shepherding and you know, helping people to preserve their spirit, because this stuff can really break you down. What's going on? I mean, I'm exhausted. I came onto the Zoom call exhausted, like my heart feels so heavy, you know. And so really checking in with ourselves spiritually and understanding the spiritual nature of things is very, very important, in my humble opinion. And there's this idea that we really need to be radical. You know, revolution is radical. Radicality is, or radicalness, I don't know what the word is kind of inherent in revolution. Radical being relating to or affecting the fundamental nature of something. So the fundamental nature of this thing called white supremacy has to be, well, white supremacy itself has to be completely done away with. But we have to be radical in changing ourselves, like changing our fundamental nature. So that is the aspects of spiritual revolution and evolution, and why I communicate it that way, why I wrote it that way. And there's this issue of most people get their moral teachings usually from some kind of spiritual or religious tradition. So within spirituality, we have moral accountability, and that's something that for me, I believe is most important, moral accountability. Now, originally I wrote it as moral responsibility. Then I realized the nuance of the two words, and I'm just gonna read what I have noted here. As the main difference between responsibility and accountability is that responsibility can be shared while accountability cannot. But being accountable not only means being responsible for something, but also answering for your own actions. I just want to speak to that. So the reason why I, changed the title and put accountability is because accountability includes responsibility. If we're just talking about responsibility, it's easy to assign responsibility to the group as an entity and not to your individual self. But with accountability, you have to do both. So I'm going to read that again for anyone who missed that. The main difference between responsibility and accountability is that responsibility can be shared while accountability cannot. Being accountable not only means being responsible, but also ultimately having to answer for your own actions. Also, accountability is something you hold a person to after the task is completed. So accountability means we have to get through this thing. We have to address this thing that's going on, this challenge, this human error that is white supremacy. And at the end of it, we have to now look back and say, okay, what have we done? Let's speak to what we've done. Responsibility, on the other hand, can happen before or after the task is completed. So right now we're not at the end of it. We're at the beginning of it, I think. Unfortunately, after all these hundreds of years, we're kind of at the beginning of this. But we can take responsibility now for certain things, but then there has to be an accountability later. And morality, obviously, concerned with principles of right or wrong. So we have to really search ourselves and search our teachings for what is morally correct. Unfortunately, with American culture, because the whole foundation of this society wasn't based on moral correctness. With the genocide of Native Americans, with the enslavement of African people. So that has to be rewritten. That has to be this idea that our society can't lean on morals and we can't be accountable, each and every one of us. That's something that we have to change. We have to bring a revolution to. So I don't know how many minutes that was, but that's all I have for now, and I can answer questions if anyone wants to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Amaku. You have a good solid 7 minutes for questions, so please, everybody, thank you for your great questions in the chat as well.
Okay, I don't see the chat. Should I go to the chat?
The chat is...
Okay, or does people want to raise their hands and ask?
There's a lot of great information. There was
These ones are for Corinna.
Yeah, they were more for the previous one. My apologies.
Okay.
But thank you guys for if you have a question and you'd like to have it answered, and put it in the chat as well. We're monitoring that as well. So, Iva, do you have a question?
I do, actually. I just wondered if Amaku could speak to this at all. Hi, Amaku.
Hi, Iva.
So, the idea that as human beings, like when we were like living in caves and stuff, like back, mm-hmm. and the function of the ego, mm-hmm. That basically says that when we come up against someone else, or we're in someone else's presence or in another being's presence, mm-hmm. it allows us to like differentiate ourselves for protection. Like there's mm-hmm. that humanness piece. Mm-hmm. And where did we go so wrong? Like how did we get from this differentiation of being on alert about any being or creature, like if a bear came into your cave or something, being on alert mm-hmm. that this creature doesn't belong there, doesn't look like you, kind of idea of the ego. And I've heard this like kind of anecdotally spoken to recently by a spiritual leader that I follow, mm-hmm. who is happens to be white but has been doing this work for many years now, and so she's really speaking up right now. Anyway, I just thought it was really interesting that she went back there to sort of talk about the ego and how our ego has this like ability to differentiate mm-hmm. for our protection, but then how did this become so distorted? So in answering questions like, where did white supremacy come from? It's a sickness. Like, how did that develop from that? Mm-hmm. And I just don't know if if you've heard anything that speaks to that directly. I'm just curious. It's very, I think very interesting to talk about it from that perspective.
Yeah. For that, I can refer to a few things, but what comes to mind specifically is integral theory. Now, integral theory talks a lot about just throughout the ages, our evolution as humans. And in integral theory, which is a philosophical it involves a lot of different sciences just to explain like our passage from earlier humans to now and our stages of development of consciousness. In integral theory, there's 6 epochs of human development. I don't have them memorized, but but you can look it up. Like Ken Wilber talks a lot about it. And in his books, Epochs of Human Consciousness. But, and the epochs of human consciousness actually correspond to the stages of development when we're growing up. So when we're babies, we only acknowledge what we see. And then our egos develop, and then we only, how children like, oh, that toy is mine, this is mine. Everything sort of is centered around them. Some people actually don't grow up out of that. But also some cultures don't grow up out of that. And as to why certain cultures are in certain epochs and certain cultures are in other epochs, I have no idea. But, you can see the difference. I really want to pull up, hold on. Let me see if I can pull something up. 6 epochs of consciousness or history, epochs of history. I think I'll have to maybe send that to you guys later. But in these epochs, you have the entirety of human culture all pretty much believing the same thing. So you have an epoch where everyone was egocentric, and then it became ethnocentric, where, okay, I'm concerned about my tribe and we're a group. And then it evolved into like, industrialized society and things of that nature. Some people just got stuck in egocentric and ethnocentric. I think with white supremacy, unfortunately, white supremacist culture is stuck in the ethnocentric stage and hasn't really evolved into other stage. And the final stage, or the stage where we're at, or we're supposed to be, we're supposedly in Epoch 5, which is modernist. Epoch 6 is supposed to be postmodern, where we're super progressive and we're very cosmopolitan, and we acknowledge that and some cultures are like that, where you have people from you see it, people in Syria. I'm seeing all the protests all over the world, and I'm like, wow, this is all for Black people. But people in Syria and Palestine and Hong Kong are understanding that are in that 6th stage, the beginning of that 6th stage of Epoch 6 of human consciousness, where it's like, we're all in this together. George Floyd is all of us. And that also speaks to non-duality and non-dual, the teachings of non-duality, which we see often in Tantra, even though there are other non-dual paths, where you have some cultures who have a deep understanding of non-duality, and others who really fervently practice duality, which is where I'm separate. I'm separate from everything. I'm separate from God. I'm separate from my fellow man. But then you have certain cultures and teachings where, like for Tantra, for example, where it's like, we're not separate. I am you. You are me. Like whatever I do to you, I do to myself. So as to why certain cultures got stuck with certain ideas, I don't know. But this is what we're seeing. Non-duality, duality, ego, ethnocentric culture versus postmodernist versus modernist. It's kind of scattered. But what we're seeing with this uprising is the whole world getting on the same page and trying to, stamp out things that should have been left behind in other epochs, stamp it out completely so that we're all on the same page. Because what's happening with different cultures of the world being in different stages of consciousness is that it's a mess. And so right now with this global uprising, it's like, okay, we really want to clean this up so we can all be on the same page. And that's what we're seeing with this uprising. And that's the spiritual evolution part too, as explained by integral theory and psychology, where we're seeing this shift from one epoch to the next globally. I hope that answered the question. I guess the answer is like, I don't have an answer as to why, but this is what we're seeing, when it comes to spirituality, integral theory.
The fact that you brought up integral theory, that you're on the right track. Thank you. Okay. I appreciate that. Really.
Yeah. Amaku, and we're at the bottom of the hour. We need to move over to Ron. So thank you for that perspective. And Lisa, I saw that you had your hand raised. Maybe you can put your question in the chat or just connect together after. But I want to make sure that we move right over to the Honorable Ron Campbell. Ron, go ahead.
Thank you. Amaku, Corinna, we could have stopped after both of you and really talk about, you know, the history and the connections and the misinformation and the power that I think we get from both, right? In terms of direction, re-energizing, but also the correction of history is a hard work. It's not an easy work. The fights, the injustice, the deliberate writings of what most of us have read to be untrue. And then I've been around long enough to see the emergence of Black studies departments and name changes and, you know, the violence that went along with the protests to have these departments legitimized. I was on campus with Dr. Cornell West at the University of Pennsylvania when a lot of things were going on before there's a lot of outreach. And I know I'm here to talk about political action, but all this is political. You know, we even found our religious institutions becoming political. And, you know, part of what, you know, I wanted to talk about are just some 4 basic concepts. And I have to apologize in advance. I just got notified of a tragic loss in my faith community. My pastor's son just passed away tonight, a tragic accident. But I also think as much as we grieve, and this is what I said on Sunday, and I'll explain a little bit, that the grieving has to mean something. It has to result in something if it's honest. And if all of our efforts really mean something, there's time for the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, the compassion of just saying our thoughts and prayers are with you. I don't need your thoughts and prayers anymore. I need your body. I need your physical power. I need your spiritual power. And we're at a place where anger and frustration is because people have not been uplifted. I'm not a career politician. I ran for office 4 years ago for the first time in a town I've lived in for 21 years. But prior to that, I spent 9 years in Minneapolis working at the University of Minnesota. I've been a finance and operations person my professional career, but my passion has always been helping people. My wife was born and raised in northern Minnesota and, you know, part member of the Ojibwe tribe, and she lived in Minneapolis for 20 years, but we have family and friends and others. So our movement on Sunday was simply about a community coming together to grieve, separate the grieving from the protest. And so we invited what we thought would maybe be 200 people, turned out to be 1,500 people, because a lot of people needed to grieve in different ways. So the messages were all over the place. It was intergenerational, interracial. It was everything that I could imagine. We were completely overwhelmed. And there was supposed to be no speeches. It was supposed to be a silent walk. At the end, some kind person in the audience had a megaphone and we used that to make a little speech. Because at the end of the day, political power, people want voices heard, they want action, and they want a chance to participate. So I tried to think about it, and thank you, Micah and Lara, for inviting me. We didn't know each other. Now I feel like we really do, and we're going to know each other better because that's through the community relationship building. But again, I'm 68 years old, so I've seen a lot in the 50s, believe it or not, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the transition of why we have not done better and moving the needle and coming together is because we've left it to the politicians. And as politicians come and go, well, so does the agenda. It becomes a political agenda just to sling around, and yet we're dealing with human lives. So I got real passionate about the fact that I wasn't going to ask any politicians. I wasn't even going to ask permission. I called a small group together, started a group a week ago called Citizens for a Better Leesburg. And we said, okay, this is what we want to do. So we went and did it. And it turned out where now the energy that we have, I think, is going to hopefully lead to some other actions and some other outcomes that I know you'll talk about later. And again, I apologize that I'll stay around for a few questions, but I really do have to leave. So political power, right? What to feel about it? Feel empowered. We've always felt we didn't have the power. We had to depend upon another caretaker. So has politics become the new plantation? maybe Corinna, you can write about that too. I'm too lazy to write. But the idea is we're not beholden. We're beholden to ourselves, our community, our values, our faith, whatever community we think we belong to. And we're empowered because we ourselves are that powerful. So we should always feel empowered, even though the path may look difficult and the challenges may be overwhelming. And I'll tell you what we can do with that power in a minute. So political action. So power means that you have a responsibility, a leadership responsibility at the end of the day for yourself and maybe others. And that's accountability too. And I'll talk a little bit more about accountability, but accountability is that responsibility we have to each other. I felt very accountable to this group tonight. I didn't just cancel and get up and leave and walk out. And I felt very necessary to have this moment. And I do believe that there's a reason and a purpose and a passion where all this does come back full circle. But sometimes we get lost in that action piece and we keep thinking about, well, I need somebody to tell me how to do this or what to do. I'm hearing this all too often in the last 10 days. I'm hearing white people tell me what to do. No, I can't tell you what to do. I can tell you, I don't know your heart that much. I don't know what you're capable of. I don't know your courage. I don't know who you voted for last time. I don't know how you've tuned out or tuned in. So that has to be about a relationship and what to do. We can help each other by speaking to each other about what to do and then coming to some common consensus somehow, even if it's just two people in a household, if they don't go off in two different directions. And I can tell you in my house, there's been many different conversations. I'm just trying to save the television from being ruined. But we're all being exposed to things that talk about how to do, this action, what's right, it's all right. What's his purpose? I don't really know and understand. I'm telling you, I asked about 10 people to share with their friends. Those 10 people shared with their friends. I don't know how many friends they shared with. Those friends shared with other people. The last report I got, I started with 10. The last report I got on Google Analytics, it went out and it touched 30,000 people for last Sunday's event. It can be done even if you're not exactly sure of everything, but the idea is to move in some direction. So those political outcomes, right? How to get what you're trying to achieve. Do we always get everything that we want? And I can tell you, I have a lot of citizens come to me on a regular basis and everybody wants something. I have politicians who come to me and everybody wants something. And you can be pulled, and you could go into anybody's office and lobby with the best intentions. Again, you don't know how they're being pulled. So what I decided to do, I decided politically, I know where my values are, I know where my personal votes go, and I know what power I try to bring to the table, but I will hear anybody and everybody. I won't pick and choose who the winners and losers should be. I just know, the rich and the powerful don't need me, and I tell them that, and I don't need them, but the people need us. The people need to be heard. It's not about winning an election, and that's what you'll get sometimes. It's not popular for somebody to come on board. In the city of Minneapolis for the last 30 years, the mayor has been Democratic. The county attorney has been Democratic. The police chief has been Democratic. And what problems have we not solved? Let's be real. So let's be real about where we go, who we trust, who we talk to, and the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Now, that doesn't mean that these people with these agendas are bad people, or these people not willing to do the things that have to be done. But then we have to talk about what's the power in the community that drives the change. So that's the last piece, right? The community accountability, not the political accountability. You get to do that when you vote. But I can't wait till the next time you vote for the change that we're all seeking, the things that we want to believe should happen. I've been encouraging people now, send your messages, send your issues. Which ones, can we coalesce around, but don't just send them to me. Send them to everybody on Leesburg Town Council, send them to everybody on the county board of supervisors, send them to the state government, send them to your congresspeople, senators. We talk about judicial reform. I'm tired of talking about it because we know, again, what reform that we need. We have civilian police review boards in some states, and other states we don't. You know, we've left it to chance that there'll be a conviction. And I say we left it to chance because the process is, you know, a jury of your peers, and the jury can be rigged one way or the other. Rodney King trial, some of you may not remember, but it was moved out of LA and it was moved to Simi Valley, California. Simi Valley, California was a retired police and fire community. It was logical that we would not get justice. So we also have to look at the things that are happening and don't sit back, intersect each step of the way. So now we have charges, great. Now we have this, great. Now we have that, great. I mean, there's always these things that we have to be careful of and mindful of, but that political accountability is also not yours alone. And that goes back to not carrying the weight, right? So we see an opportunity for us to have community. We're here tonight with community. I've been invited into this community. I've been invited into many communities in the past few days where I haven't been invited before. And believe it or not, a lot of them are interfaith communities that have some energy. Sikhs, Baha'is, Hindus, the Jewish community, Muslim, everybody has a social justice agenda. I just got a call today, and I'll be on a call tomorrow from the Loudoun County Chamber of Commerce. Well, I'm not holding them accountable. I'm giving them social justice work to do as a business community and look at the economic impact, and we all know the disparities. I'm looking at the health. I mean, things that are present that make sense for people to tap into. Tap into it right now. But that's our own personal accountability for saying we want change. Well, then we have to get out there, have those meetings, lobby like our lives and other lives depended upon it, and then hold people accountable when it really doesn't happen. In my lifetime, the protests, you know, have been good, whether it's civil rights or anti-war or students taking over president's offices, that we get people's attention. But we want more than their attention. So we got to have concrete ideas, and we have then expect a concrete response to what our ideas are. And we can always be turned down, but we need a legitimate response. And if it's not legitimate, then that's where it goes back into accountability. We correct people with history. We correct people with positive energy. And if possible, we should know people whose energy is different to help persuade. Malcolm X persuaded Martin Luther King Jr. and this country that a solution had to be found because another solution was in the offing that they didn't want to see. And Malcolm X changed and was persuaded because his vision of spirituality and being a Muslim had to be expanded to understand the nation of Islam wasn't about what happened as a nation in Chicago. It was about this global experience of people who represented the Islamic faith were white, blue-eyed, brown. They were of all types of people and places. So we have more of a commonality. We just have to continue, even politically, to open up people's eyes. And my hashtag has always been people over politics. The politics we need, the power we need, but if we have the people, it's not a seasonal event from election cycle, and that's been the trap why we have not progressed. We've depended upon people for election cycle, and they have failed us. They have failed our children, our grandchildren. I promise you, I'm not in this to fail you or us, that this is too real for all of us. So let's tap into our common energy. Let's tap into the moment. It's not to be taken lightly, that there's a moment here. And even the doctors have been understanding in the hospital, when you have a heart attack, they call it the golden moment. And you have only a certain amount of time to resuscitate that person or it dies, and they die. This could die too if we don't take advantage of this moment. We get active in our communities. We start tapping into this energy and connect. That our community is bigger. We need more partnerships in our community. We've acted alone too often. And so now it's time to look at all of us doing the heavy lifting. So again, I want to thank you. I really didn't want to preach. I'll take a couple of questions if there are there, but understand right now my heart is hurting, and and it's just an incredible time.
Ron, I so want to express gratitude that you stayed on to speak. I can't imagine what you must be feeling, and my heart goes out to Pastor Michelle and the whole community and to you. I do have a question, though, regarding what you just talked about, and that is, the ideas is one thing, right? We come up with some solid ideas, but the execution of those ideas, right? What's the best way to get the change made? Is it letter writing? Is it calling the elected officials? Is it taking the president's office, in the vote? I mean, what's your perspective?
Well, no, I call it the shotgun effect. You look at the legislative body that you want to impact, and you send it out to everybody. The first person responds is your person. That's your ally. The first person who responds to help carry, and to help lobby, and to help guide you through the process. So they may not understand. They think they're just doing a nice thing by responding, but now that's your target because you have somebody who picked up the phone, right? Mm-hmm. The callers do.
That's smart.
And if you know someone, then you bring them in, and obviously, that also is your person. But you're asking for that ally relationship, for that person to carry that legislation or to carry that issue to their colleagues.
Mm.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Great answer. Yeah, we only have Ron for a very short amount of time, so please do not hesitate if you have a question. And I would love to hear from our youth. I'm pointing you out.
I know it's difficult a little bit, and again, you all have my contact information, and I really do believe in engaging the next generation and being mentors and getting people involved in volunteerism, and things where they can, and so it is a cycle. Lisa.
Yes, thank you so much, and my deep condolences to you and your community. I'm wondering about with the movement and the action that you took just a few days ago in community, how you engaged police, if they were present, and how we engage them going forward, in order to make change and to interact with them in thoughtful ways. But I'm wondering if they were present, if you had interaction with them, what that was like too.
Yes, and we decided a few years ago through our local Loudoun County NAACP that they actually have a memorandum of understanding with the town and the town police, how we want to communicate when their times are good and crises, how we want to look at training. So we have a very active relationship with our chief, and not a sheriff's department that reports somewhere else. The chief actually reports to the town, and basically I'm one of his bosses. So I had a little bit of advantage of communication. Well, it's also awareness of insight and things that we needed to do. So while we weren't ready for what happened in terms of size of crowd, we were able to mobilize quickly. And the whole goal was to keep everybody safe and to keep and allow the event to happen as it grew organically. But we did have a lot of communication the days preceding, and that's helpful. So the first step is that you don't have to demand a relationship with your local police. It should be the nature of what community policing is about, of which you hold your elected officials accountable for, and then whoever is either elected or appointed as that chief of police or sheriff's department. Thank you. All right, well, thank you. Again, I apologize. I really appreciate this moment, and I know there'll be more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
There will be more. Thank you so much.
Sending love.
Blessings.
Thank you.
All right.
Wow. Wow, you guys. Just take a moment, like, wow.
Should we take a moment, give 5 for a bio break?
Does anybody need to take just a breather break, like 3 minutes, use the bathroom, grab a glass of water? Saw some thumbs up, something. Okay, let's stick with it. If you need to break, come back. And if you aren't on camera, we welcome you to be on camera now, particularly because we're going into the part of our time where we're really taking what all three of our speakers said, but really following that wave that Ron just left us with, which is, what do we do next? You know, how do we come up with really like be an idea factory, come up with great ideas and then get behind them and then collectively decide what we want to move forward on. We do have a couple really wonderful ideas that are brewing out there already, and yeah.
Yeah, so let's move into the ideation portion of the agenda. So the first one is join the NAACP. So Ron, or the council member who just spoke, he is a member of the NAACP, and the woman whose son just died tragically in an accident today is the president of the Loudoun County, which is our local county, the Loudoun County NAACP. And Laura and I spent an hour on the phone with her and a bunch of other community leaders talking about some organizing things, and she is an absolute force of nature. And she has just lists and lists and lists of things that she wants to take on. And you know, she's marshaling all these resources to come and help with that. And some of that is to do marches every Sunday throughout June. So really building,
I'll take the slide down. No, please go.
Really building on the success that they had in the Leesburg one. They're going to be doing it in 4 other towns around Loudoun County over the next 4 weeks, including a Father's Day one that I'll be helping to organize in Sterling on the 21st. So as a result of actually finding out what the NAACP does, and shame on me, I'm just finding out today, I went ahead and joined. It cost $30 for the year. It took me less than a minute to sign up. The action is local. You sign up for a local chapter and you immediately get plugged in with people who are doing great stuff. So my first idea is all of us, if we joined the local NAACP chapters, there's lots of things that we could do in conjunction with that existing organization. So that's idea number 1. Idea number 2, I got an email today from somebody who was not able to be on the call, but they asked me to read this on the call in advocacy for something called Campaign Zero. So this is what they wrote me. They wrote, I experienced police brutality in Loudoun last year. And by the way, for those of you who aren't from Loudoun, Loudoun is one of the, if not the wealthiest counties in the country. And I don't say that to brag, I say that because it matters for what's in here. So I experienced police brutality in Loudoun last year. I would like people to know police brutality is not theoretical or someone else's problem for Loudouners. It's real. It happens here too. We must take action before it's too late. The Citizens Accountability Board, proposed by Buddha Bibarej, who is our local state's attorney, and the Loudoun NAACP are a great start. And then he gave me a link to join Campaign Zero. And Campaign Zero is something that's been floating around in social media for the past several days. I've seen it from a number of different places, including from Laura, where there's a large number of just common sense ways that we can start to imagine a world where police don't kill people, particularly not people based on the color of their skin. And so it's broken up into 10 different types of reform. Broken window policing that was advocated by Rudy Giuliani in New York back during the crack wars. Community oversight and having, like Ron talked about, having a civilian oversight board over the police. Number 3, limiting the use of force in police. Number 4, independently investigating any deadly force or police misconduct reports. Number 5, having community representation on the police boards. Number 6, every cop wears a body cam and every body cam is on for every interaction with a citizen. Number 7, all kinds of different training things, and I'll talk about more of that in a second. Number 8, end for-profit policing. There's a whole mercenary angle to policing. Number 9, demilitarize the police. The police are getting more and more military-grade weapons and riot gear and are acting more and more like a military organization in a lot of cases. And then number 10, and Corinna was talking to me a lot about this earlier, is that fair police union contracts really drives a lot of the notion that the police look out for their own, that if a bad cop does a bad thing, that the good cops are going to cover up for him. And that's somewhat enshrined in how the police unions operate. So step 1 to doing something about that is to address police unions. And Corinna, I hate to put you on the spot, but that was the one that you put on my radar. Would you mind coming off mute and just speaking to that for a moment? You're still muted.
Corinna, love, we can't hear you if you can hear us.
Sorry, hold on. Can you hear me now?
Hey,
Yes,
Okay, good. Sorry. So in Miami, there's been a conversation among some of my friends who are very concerned about policing, talking about how even though we do have a civilian oversight committee, that it's very controlled by the police union and the police. And I've also heard interesting stories about how our local police union has practices where they are hindering people of African descent getting jobs as police officers because of the way they handle the applications. So there are some things that go on with union, like the police. I'm very pro-union, don't get me wrong, but police unions there's a lot of problematic things going on with their police unions, and they do need to have more oversight. But I want to go to something that Mr. Campbell said that I think is so important. And it is about looking at every step in the process of things, and where you think that you've achieved justice, but it gets blocked up later on down the line. Like you think that there's going to be a trial. Oh gosh, okay, now this person's going to go to trial, and yet the people, there's no, if you follow even certain high profile cases like the Miami River Cops case here in Miami, it was one of the biggest police brutality cases in the United States. It was a mass number of officers who were arrested. So few ever got, so little actually happened to the majority of these officers. And so I think going back and tracking what happened and what were the systems that allowed these kinds of things to happen. And if you do that on a local level, you can find out, okay, what's going on here? Like, how have they worked something out in the system that is preventing justice from being served? And even if you're sort of analyzing that and identifying, and then you focus your energy on those sort of blockages to justice, I think that's something that you can do.
Awesome, thank you. I also want to just read something off of the chat. Lisa Adams said another similar organization is called 8 Can't Wait. And Madeline Jones said, for demilitarizing the police, advocate for the ending of the 1033 program, where police forces are given leftover excess military gear for nothing. They just pay shipping costs. So yeah, great ideas. Thank you for that as well. So there's 8 Can't Wait. There's the joincampaignzero.org. And that's that. So just in terms of trying to do the old rule of 3, where anything that's more than 3 gets to be, for a lot of people, a little bit overwhelming, myself especially. 3 things that I've been saying repeatedly to people, and everybody keeps nodding their heads like they seem like the right 3, are these. Number 1, those universal police body cameras. Talked about accountability, Amaku, earlier. So important to trust but verify and hold people accountable. And these videos, we can't rely on there happening to be a bystander videoing when a police officer does something deadly to somebody. So if those body cameras are on all the time with every citizen, that's number one. Number two, de-escalation training. It's something that has been shown to be very successful to train police officers in how not to let a situation get to the point where they need to use deadly force. De-escalation training is only sporadically used in various different police departments. And by the way, there's 13,000 relatively autonomous police departments across the country at the local, county, and state levels, not to mention all the different federal ones. And of course, the federal government is in no position these days to do anything useful in this area. So de-escalation training, if every one of us, for example, checked with our local police to see, hey, are you mandating de-escalation training? If not, why not? Number three, peer intervention training, and this is really critical. When you look at the situation that happened with George Floyd, there were 3 police officers on top of Mr. Floyd and a 4th one who was standing around making sure that the crowd was kept under control. If any of those people had decided, hey, you know what, this isn't right, let's do something different here, let's get off his neck, there may have been a very different outcome. And even if he had still died, but one of those cops had said something like, hey, this is wrong, let's stop doing this, and he was ignored, at least there would be some notion that somebody representing that badge felt the right thing to do, but none of them did. And a big part of what has been successful with this, particularly in Laura and I's second home of New Orleans, which once had the most corrupt police force in the country, to the point where the feds came in and completely took it over. Peer intervention training was what they credit as being the most important thing that they did to turn that around, is to change the culture of that blue curtain, that
Blue code.
blue code, right? Where police were actually encouraged to look out for, not for each other, but for the reputation of the police in general, right? And looking out for the reputation of the police means doing the right thing for the community. So those are the 3: body cameras, de-escalation training, peer intervention training. And if all of us write letters, call our elected officials and police leadership at the town, county, and state levels, maybe that'll change something. So that's idea number 2.
Peter had raised his hand for a question. Actually, 2 people had. I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oops. So Peter Corbush, you want to come off mute and...
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Peter.
So glad you're here.
Yes, I'm glad to be here as well. It's great to be in an open forum like this. I wanted to talk about the de-escalation of the police, because I've seen some things going around that have been concerning to me, to say the least. One of the biggest things that has been going around is the hashtag 8can'twait, which is requiring de-escalation, require warnings before shootings, things like that. A lot of revolutionaries along the West Coast came together and they made a hashtag 7can'twait. And I just kind of wanted to go through those and get opinions, because they are a little bit more radical, but I feel like they could lead to a better, more sustainable future. So the first thing is reparations for victims of police violence, personal liability insurance, decrease and redirect police and prison funds, civilian police accountability boards, disarming plus demilitarizing the police, simplifying the dissolvement of police departments, as well as data transparency, which stops arrest, weapons, everything. Overall, I think this can lead to a way to defund, de-arm, dismantle, and eventually disrupt the police department as a whole. But I wanted to open it up and see what people's thoughts on the idea of dissolving the police department as a whole.
Ooh. Dissolving the police department. Does anybody have a...
I have a question. Sorry, what is actually meant by dissolving it? Like, what's the actual idea? Like like getting rid of it and then replacing it with what?
It's removing the police department as a whole. As of right now, a lot of the ideas we've been talking about is stronger communities make police worthless. A lot would be basically down to community involvement. And obviously with that, there comes the insane hurdles of the prejudices that would have to be destroyed, privilege that would have to be dismantled, things like that. But as a whole, as of right now, the goal is to demilitarize and then eventually dissolve the police department as a whole. And we've seen parts of that happening with the LAPD losing almost $150 million now. That defunding process is starting. But what are we going to do to ensure that we can dismantle the means of oppression?
I could speak to that a little bit. No expert by any means, but I read an article the other day about this idea of dissolving the police force. And I think it's a kind of an ideal that I don't foresee ever really happening, but I think it is something that we could at least move toward. And one point that the article made that was a really bright aha moment for me was that the police are responsible for handling so much and such a wide kinds of different calls. Like if someone's having a mental health breakdown or problem, that's a lot of times directed to a police, and a police with a weapon answers, someone who may be having a mental breakdown, domestic violence, homeless and hungry people having problems. And there's so much that falls under the umbrella of social problems that get called to 911, and an officer of the police force comes. So one thing that would be moving towards that would be have different kind of call centers for different kinds of problems. So if someone's having a mental health breakdown that's alarming to people, that there's a call center where that goes, and a mental health professional responds rather than the police officer. And, kind of departmentalizing and removing some of these responsibilities from the police, where they would be handled in a better way that would less often end in violence from either side.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. And, I think that to your point, it's an ideal, but there's a lot in getting there that can be really positive. So that $150 million that was taken away from the Los Angeles Police Department and invested in the community goes towards things that can, over time, lessen the need for over-policing in those neighborhoods. Then, it pays for itself. And so the question then becomes, what are those things that can be done in terms of investing in those underprivileged communities that can really make an impact, right? So then we look back in history to 1968 and the Corinna Commission and LBJ. And Annabelle, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute, I think this is a perfect segue to talk about the work that you're doing with that.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. I just wanted to share that, we've been very focused on police brutality and attempts to reform police training and police practices. In 1967, when there were riots, there were about 150 or so riots around that time in those few years in the 60s. LBJ did put together this presidential commission with academics, politicians, policy people, community leaders, and they studied why did this happen and how do we prevent it from happening again. And basically the commission, and they were pretty mainstream people, put the blame squarely on white racism.
Yes.
and this is back in, the report came out in 68, and that the proposals that came up with were not just about the police, but it was really comprehensive.
Yes.
About poverty, unemployment, about segregation, about housing, healthcare. I mean, just it was very comprehensive, and the proposals were so good, in fact, that Dr. King said this is the prescription for life for a dying patient. Right? This is the blueprint, and of course, those proposals were completely ignored by Johnson and really everybody. And here we are. If we had actually followed those proposals, we would not be here at all. We would not be here. And so 52 years later, I think we need to look at it again in the context of what's happening right now. And I don't think we want to make the mistake of just reducing it to police brutality, and really asking people to look at it, take a step back and look at the whole picture, look at this comprehensively. And, and this is a great place to start, because the same dynamics really are present today, if not slightly worse in some ways, especially in the context of the pandemic and the depression that we're heading towards, economic depression we're heading towards. I think we really have to seize this opportunity to solve the problems that are like really structural and interconnected with all these other institutions. And one of the things that, I mean, really what we're talking about is like massive federal investment, government investment into the Black community, Black and Brown communities, and to address income inequality, address poverty. And, I think this is actually a perfect time to redesign our society. We have to have another way forward. And I just think we need to demand more than just looking at the police, because that's kind of where, like, by that point, it's like an accident. But before the accident, there are all these things you can do to prevent that accident from happening, right? And so we got to look at these other things, and we got to demand more. And I think our vision has to be much bigger than police reform. We can't just scapegoat the police. They are certainly part of the problem, but they're not the only problem. And what we're talking about is like poverty and powerlessness and just a systemic racism. And so let's look at it in that way. I mean, I think part of what I would like to advance as a kind of call to action for all of us is we've got to have conversations like this that each of us can initiate. Let's get our circles of friends together and start having these conversations where we educate people so that we don't repeat this mistake over and over and over and over again, over and over. And we're going to keep doing it if we don't address the root problems. And if we don't demand more. We just spent $3 trillion on a bailout. So don't tell us there's no money. We can do this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa, did you have a question?
So I have kind of really like a statement and something I want to throw out there, and it kind of winds in with what Annabelle was saying, and it also ties in with what Amaku was saying. And this is a time of change and revolution. It's very clear. We've known for a long time, that it's time for everything to change. We've been unhappy. We've seen the inequities. Like now we're just really having to be really smacked in the face with the tragedies of it all. And so I do think that we're, you know, this is an opportunity that we have to seize. One of the things I keep thinking about is, you know, I'm not sure that as a society that we can keep moving forward towards like a new way of doing things, towards new government, et cetera, without some healing. And so I think about like what they did in South Africa with apartheid. They did the Truth and Reconciliation, where people, you know, stood up and they took ownership over, you know, their parts and things, and they got to be seen and witnessed and heard, and there were apologies, and people, you know, people were like, you know, really helping facilitate healing happen. Because I'm with you. This has to start on a spiritual level and a personal level, and from there, you know, I think it really ripples out. So you know, because this country was built on a foundation of, you know, genocide and slavery and pain and murder and imperialism and so on, that we can't keep going forward, I think, without there being some sort of healing. And, you know, maybe it starts with our own sort of personal truth and reconciliation. I'm not sure, but I would love to see and be part of something like that happening, you know, in our communities, and then, like, you know, rippling out on a broader scale. So that's all I'm going to say. Thanks.
And so Annabelle, there's more questions. Sorry. E. Williams, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what your first name is, but do you want to speak next? Mr. Williams? Nope. Okay.
We can't hear you. Yeah.
Corinna?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, there you
can
go.
hear you.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. I just want to say, when I started my law enforcement career in the early 70s, and it concluded in the mid-90s, I worked for 3 different law enforcement organizations, and I saw pretty much the same thing across the board. And again, it was we've heard about the culture of law enforcement, and there is a culture, there is even a racist culture in law enforcement. And I worked 20 years for one of the local police departments in this area. And then I retired after 20 years. I worked for another law enforcement organization for 10 years before I retired from that one. And again, it was generally the same thing from the time I started until the time I retired. And again, it was just the culture that was just there. It was very perpetual. It was encouraged. And as a result of that, I find that a lot of minority, particularly Blacks, we do not want our children and grandchildren to become law enforcement officers because of the culture, because of what we hear. We say that it's a dangerous job, things of that nature. But we come up with these reasons why we don't want our children to do it. However, we have others who are policing our neighborhoods. Yes. And those who are policing our neighborhoods are causing the problems in our neighborhoods. We need to encourage and facilitate ways of getting those who are living in these neighborhoods to become part of the police departments in order to make some of these things go away. It is hard for an individual to kneel on his neighbor's neck for 8 minutes. Someone that he knows, someone that he's familiar with. And, but again, when we begin or get into the area of dehumanizing people, then it becomes easy to abuse, disrespect, and even to kill when we dehumanize. And as a result of that, because of the culture in law enforcement, there are those in the community who are already what dehumanized. So it's easy to mistreat them during the course of the law enforcement responsibility. And so once again, but I think that we need to find out ways to make sure that we get those who are living in the neighborhoods to police their neighborhoods rather than having people from outside the neighborhood who lives in another part of the state, another city, another county, come into our neighborhoods for policing. And again, the police, they do such a wide array of jobs, and I can understand that. And it's important that they do. That's why I cannot foresee getting rid of the police. Because again, when I became a police officer, it wasn't because I loved police, but again, it was because I saw a need for police. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, it was Martin Luther King. I was watching the news one night, and it was Martin King who said that the reason these things are happening in our neighborhoods were because we do not have enough Black police officers. And I remember as a teenager, sitting in front of the TV, I said, I'll do it. And then from that time, that's when I decided to make sure that I never got into trouble in the neighborhood or anywhere. That's when I decided to go to college and do all of these things to make sure that there would be no reason to reject me as a law enforcement officer. And as a result of that, again, I just think we need to look at that from that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that was really powerful. I really appreciate you opening up about your experience. And wow, it's really an eye-opener on how much work there is to do. Corinna, you sounded like you had tried to jump in earlier. Did you have?
I did, but I actually, I really appreciate, was it Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Comments? Yes. So I really appreciate that. It just reminded me of a ethnography by an anthropologist in France of, I'm not exactly sure his background, but I believe he's Muslim, French. And he was writing about, he got inspired to write about the police operations in the suburbs of Paris that are actually mostly Black and brown folks in these suburbs. And one of the things, because his own son was arrested and mistreated, and it inspired him to do this ethnography. And one of the things that he noticed was that a lot of the hiring of officers was officers who had never been to these neighborhoods before. They were from completely different areas, and they were mostly working class white folks who were then put into these neighborhoods where they had already this kind of fear because they were used to more racially homogeneous communities. And it was sort of setting things up to happen, these kinds of encounters. And yet the government would always say, but we don't have police brutality here. That's something that happens in the United States. And yeah, and I think it's, so my point earlier that I wanted to say too is, and it goes back to other earlier comments that we have to see things holistically, is that to think about the local, like the hyper local, like what can we do in the most local level, but also really be thinking global in the fact that if you look at the increased militarization of the police, it also comes when you have like the dirty wars in Latin America, and you have increased militarization in other parts of the world sponsored by the US government. And the militarization is basically bringing war, like the war machine, into the United States, something that was already happening in other parts of the world. And to see these connected things, and to make these solidarities and use the power of the internet to build solidarity with folks, not only in our own regional and local areas, but to do that and to start making connections with folks in other parts of the United States. And then even beyond that, but there are tangible things I think we can do, even if it is not directly related to the police or issues of police brutality. Other ways that we can show up, that we are not expected to show up on these little committees and budget committees in government. And the same old folks, I'm an activist in my neighborhood, and the same folks show up. And there needs to be, I hope and beg young people who are participating here to think about getting on committees, showing up at city hall meetings, council hall meetings, and saying, I'm here, I'm witnessing, I'm going to participate, because you are not too young to do that. And your voice really does matter, and your participation matters.
And Corinna, that's a perfect segue to something that was on the chat that was written privately to us. But basically the idea was that, what is it that has some of us coming out on this call here to try to talk about things that we can do to move things forward, versus the people who have chosen to say, hey, this is not my problem, this is somebody else's problem to deal with, right? So the people who are showing up versus the people who aren't showing up, and not to create an us and them, but the question is, what can all of us do to approach the people who aren't showing up in those activist moments with you, Corinna, or on a call like this, or whatever the situation may be, and what can each of us do to talk to those people about overcoming the obstacles and getting past whatever's in the way of them showing up and making a difference in the situation.
Well, I'm going to be real blunt, and I'm going to be real simple. Just friggin' talk to each other.
Yeah.
Like it's not that complicated. We're here right now, and it's amazing. The soil right now in our culture and in our communities is so soft and so ready for somebody to reach out to each other and talk to each other. We've spent the entire week reaching out to people we've never met before. So I really think it's that simple, that in that question, not to belittle that, it's not a small question, it's a huge question, but it's, reach out to somebody and have a conversation that you've never had a conversation about with someone you've never had a conversation with. And that's what we're here doing now. And I see, it's really beautiful to watch how when different people are talking, there's different resonance that's happening. Like we have this beautiful big screen in front of us, and I can see like how people are getting agitated and involved and like animated in their seats when different people are speaking. So I really feel that this might be a wonderful opportunity to start to create bubbles, circles within our circles, to connect with other people, to talk about these specific ideas in which we're passionate about. And shall we introduce Annabelle's?
Yeah, although Peter just wrote something that's very much aligned with what you just said. Silence is compliance.
Yes.
And there's an obligation we all have to educate our communities, whether we're protesting on the streets
or not.
Totally agree. And Lisa is saying no one is exempt from taking responsibility for racism. But bringing it back to Annabelle, I know you had a specific proposal that you wanted to bring to the table around homes.
So I'm working on basically a template that people can use to have conversations with people, with their friends, right? Because I think the invitation needs to be a bit gentle and say, let's learn together, let's think together, instead of like, we're gonna push you to do something that they may not be comfortable with. And so we're gonna, I'm working with people who are really incredible at facilitation, and creating things that you could anyone can just learn to facilitate, and just kind of go through prompts and have like a productive conversation, and give people resources to things like the Corinna Commission report. Like I think once people like know what it is, I feel it would lead to a very rich conversation. That conversation was never had, but I feel like, well, why don't we have it now? And so I would like to invite you all to try this with me, you know, follow this template, invite your friends. And I don't think it should be that big. I'm thinking like a dinner table size conversation, like 5 to 6, maybe 8 people, and just really start creating conversations, and asking people to learn something. And I think the more history we learn, the better off we're going to be. And so, you know, that's one example of something that I think could help people. But there are other examples of historical events that I think people would benefit from understanding, you know, like, yeah. So I can go through a list of that, but the idea is to use Zoom, and maybe one day it'd be safe to meet in person, but use Zoom and other tools like it to start having conversations about the way we can go forward together as a nation.
Yeah. So, Annabelle, how can we take your beautiful idea and all the work that you've been working on? I know you're still cultivating that. How can we contact you, get that information, and actually build those scripts into smaller circles within our community here? Like,
sure. I mean, should I share my contact information now, or do you want to circulate it, or what? Do you want to?
Great question. Actually, I would welcome anybody here, because we're gonna. I don't know about you guys, but be aware we're a community now. That this has happened. You're in the crucible, okay? To have people share their information on how they would best like to be contacted. So I would welcome to put it in the chat. All of this is recorded, and all of this will also be scripted out in written form, so that you can find that information easily. But if you put it in the chat, that's an invitation to everybody. We can begin there.
Yeah, and I think even more prescriptively, putting our contact information along with the ideas that are resonating from us into the chat would really help. And so the people who brought those to the table can collect all of those and own the next steps. But before we get to that, Annabelle, were you feeling complete with your idea? Was there something around the documentaries you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that would be interesting is, since we can record these calls, that would, like, if people, with everyone's permissions, of course, like we could take some of the recordings and start to put together videos that we can share to the public. So like, you know, like 3 to 5 minute pieces of these conversations, and get them out there more widely to the public, and encourage everyone to start thinking about things using a historical lens, you know, instead of just being too close to the action and what's happening. But we've all gone through this before. We've had these conversations before. The answers are there, you know, and we can benefit from the wisdom of the ages. And so, you know, I would like for us to really become students of history, have these discussions, and create media together, because ultimately we have to get this out to the wider public and not just in these small circles. So, you know, with the recorded conversations, we can edit them into, you know, short videos that we can distribute widely. You know, I have a Facebook page right now with 400,000 people on it. It's a progressive page called Talk on Main Street. That's one place among many that we could start to circulate these conversations. And I think it could be really powerful, you know. I mean, even parts of this conversation is really beautiful that we could edit into a video.
Beautiful.
Yes.
All right, so I know Sehar has had her hand up for quite some time. Apologies, but are you still?
Oh, no problem. I forgot to lower my hand. I think at some point I raised it up, and then So I think understanding the root cause of violence and anger is important really here. A lot of issues that are happening on both sides is a cry for help that needs to be heard both on the victim and on the police. And so I think everything has been said. The only thing I wanted to add in terms of advocating for this is where is the witness protection? If I see, for example, this blows my mind, that you see violence, whether it's police or something, and people are grabbing video and capturing the moment and recording it. Okay, I understand you're trying to create material, but what if people try to speak up and interfere? And as of now, I know that you cannot basically interfere with police when they are engaged in any kind of scene. So what if I am not voting for getting rid of the police. I think they still serve a purpose and they need to exist to some level. So all the other stuff is good and fine, but there would be a group, a department, or a way that the witness of those circumstances, if there is a witness, to have the ability and the power to interfere.
Was that a question, Sahar?
I think we are collecting thoughts on how to make it, and this is an idea being shared.
Okay.
So is this slide on bystander training being shown right now? Can you guys see that?
No, nothing so far. I was just going to mention the Bystander Act of 2020. It's a petition going around, and you can look it up, and it's basically an act that would allow for bystanders to intervene in situations with police brutality. So it has a Facebook page called Bystander Act 2020 that gives you more information about this. And the petition is on the Facebook page that's created for it called the Bystander Act. So I signed a petition like a couple of days ago.
So
thank you.
That's fantastic.
Thank you. That's very current.
And one of the members of our community, I'm not going to out her because she chose not to talk about it on this, but I will for her, talked about the idea of bystander training. And bystander training is kind of like a, if you see something, say something kind of situation, but it's also what do you do when you do see it? It's not just say something, but do something, right? So what can you do in a situation where you're witnessing racist violence, and maybe it's police oriented and that's got its own set of course issues, but there's a lot of situations where you may see something that's not police related, that's white supremacist or just some kind of hate oriented crime in progress. What do you do about that? And this is something that exists and that is available, and we actually have through this person who brought this to our attention, gotten in contact with an organization out of Montreal who was willing to do a 2-hour bystander training with regards to racist violence for us next week. And so we're still in the process of trying to nail down details, but that's something that is going to be available next week. It'll probably be somewhere on the order of like 15 or 20 bucks a head to do it, depending on how many people we get, and it could make a huge difference. So for all of us to be trained, and actually we bounced this idea off of Councilman Ron when he was here. He was here earlier. He was the one who had to leave because of the death in his community, but we spoke to him about this yesterday, and he thought not only was this a phenomenal idea, but we should do it and invite the local police to also take the training, because then they could see how we were going to be reacting when we saw racist violence in progress, so that they would see what they were going to be up against when people like us stepped in and did something when we saw something. So I thought that was really very, very interesting as well. So that's another idea that came from the community that I'm representing as a result.
Yeah. So please stay tuned. We'll have more information as that develops. We've been in touch with an organization that's actually helping us find really key people out there to come and teach. And it would be a 2-hour commitment, one evening. We're looking, our sweet spot seems to be Thursday evenings. So just stay tuned on our Facebook page, both our personal and our temple page. So we'll get that information out to you guys.
I just want to mention about I'm sorry, I think it's important to say something about this bystander training, because we've all seen, throughout the history of this country and even recently with the people in Michigan, and even just like any open carry, any white male carrying a weapon, even a white male carrying a weapon openly is not a threat to the police, is not perceived as a threat, as much of a threat to the police as an unarmed Black person. So I think with this bystander training, the call really should be out to, for the most part, white males, because they have a lot of power in these situations, and they're not seen as a threat, and they're seen as equals, because even if the police officer is a person of color, the culture of the police forces are to oppress people of color, so they are taught to oppress their own people. So they have it in their minds that even someone who looks like them is the enemy. So, doesn't matter what color the police officer is, the police culture teaches to respect the white male. And so with bystander training, if I take it, if women of color take it, that might be putting us in danger to try to intervene in these situations. So if white males, for example, are around us and are taking the lead in these situations, it'll be a lot safer for the rest of us. And the call, the emphasis really should be for white males to take part in this and to be trained as bystanders who intervene in police brutality situations.
That's a great idea. And the Temple in the Trees has a monthly men's circle. They're not all white, obviously, but I shouldn't say obviously. They're not all white, but many of us are. And that's an outstanding point. So I'll bring that to the group. Some of them are here now, but I'm not going to out anybody. Thank you.
But
yes.
we are going to hold you guys accountable. I mean that's straight up. I'm kind of holding the fire stick here. For those of you who are in our men's group here, and
do it.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I ask you guys, like, there are certain things we really would like for you to commit to, all of you. But I'm specifically asking, like, our men are our foundation in so many ways, and so please show up.
I'll do it.
All right, you're next.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Do it.
Hear your voice, Ross. Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Lara and Michael for just creating all of this opportunity for us. It just struck me to say that when you were sharing this bystander training that's coming up next week, I'm beyond blown away. You guys are freaking amazing. Thank you so much. I did have a question earlier that I don't want to forget to ask, and I don't want to assume that this is the case because you guys are such amazing leaders and you've stepped up so quickly after all of this escalation of, global uprising, all of this, and had this created so we could come together and be here. I love the idea of the people here finding their bubbles, like you said, Lara, figuring out who you can connect with and who you can really, maybe make a difference with. But I love the idea of us all coming back together regularly as well, and just sort of bouncing things off of each other. And that's where accountability happens too. So I just wanted to ask if you guys were, planning to keep this going regularly. How can we support you in making that happen? I love the idea of us all doing our own circles. I want to know what you guys envision for that. And if we can, how can we help you guys?
Thank you, first and foremost. Thank you, that's awesome. Yes, and we hold regularly our monthly men's and women's circles, so those are going to keep going, and we will be doing this more. This whole thing has been fueled by passion and trust, really trusting, and it's amazing who has shown up in this. So we'll discuss those next steps definitely on our page. So follow those. This will continue. We don't know exactly how yet, but we'll.
Yeah, we didn't really have a good sense of how this was going to go.
Yeah.
We felt like we'd figure it out in the moment.
We will. We've been using the analogy of earthquakes. Like this right now is the earthquake. And if you've ever been in an earthquake or ever lived in an area that has encountered them, the aftershocks are actually bigger. So we want many, many aftershocks, okay? So with that analogy, we hope that you guys can come back to the epicenter.
Yep. All right, Danielle finally figured out how to raise her hand.
Yay!
Yay!
Yes. So for the training that you mentioned, the bystander training and inviting the local police department, if it would be okay, I would also like to extend the invitation to the Herndon Police Department. I know that they have, I would like to brag on them a little bit. They are very good at community policing. They are very in tune with the town and the inhabitants of the town and do a very good job. And that is the opinion expressed by not just me, a white lady, but also the people of color who live in my neighborhood and in the surrounding neighborhoods in town. So that said, they've been very open to working with, for example, the community had a car parade tonight as a show of support for Black Lives Matter. And the police department and the police chief were very much on top of working with the organizers of that event. So I think they would be very open to
That's awesome.
that kind of training.
Yeah. Can you send some contact information to us so we can?
I sure can.
The community relations
Yeah.
desk or something like that there.
Yeah, I hereby make you all ambassadors for our temple.
Everybody is empowered.
So if you feel so empowered, Danielle, and I'm specifically, like, you can contact them on your behalf, and, you know, for your own person, but for us as well, for these community meetings, and just funnel that back to us, and we'll make it happen. But if you can make first contact, that'd be great.
Okay,
that'd be great. Thank you.
And Mitch Jones, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Mars, your hand is up.
Oh.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you guys so much for doing this. I feel really happy to be here. I have to say, I don't feel like I have like a super well formulated thought. But one of the things that I don't think I heard mentioned was just talking about our children, like starting really, really young in the education system. And I just wanted to put the seed out that something that's really important to me is like starting, I feel like kids are like the seed, and like that's the future generations, and that racism is really something that's taught. And if kids are brought up in families where there's a lot of hatred, to off balance that by having the education system really offer a lot of not training per se, but just like bringing in the fact that we are all equal, and really educating children. So I don't know if there's any educators in this circle, or just planting the seed of maybe how we could, I don't know, bring that cause to light.
You know, being on that NAACP call earlier today, that was a huge emphasis for them. We must have spent 45 minutes talking about how do we get the right books in there, because you know, there's African-American children who never see people who look like them in their books, in their libraries, and in their faculty anywhere. So getting those books in there, minority hiring practices, things like that. So I think that's a really good opportunity to get involved there, is through that organization.
Through the NAACP specifically, yeah,
Okay.
definitely. There's also a beautiful list of children's books, specifically children's books, that's being cultivated by a dear friend of mine who's a father of children. So on a very minute level, I will share that on my Facebook page as that becomes available. And
but there's a stunning lack of history. Like, for example, I just learned about Tulsa 6 months ago, which is ridiculous. I'm incredibly well educated by any standard. I mean, I've got diplomas and stuff, and I just found out about it in an article, and I'm like, holy crap, how does something like that not get taught in school? It's just mind-boggling. And then it turns out that's not the only example, surprise, surprise, of pieces of our history that we'd rather not acknowledge as a country, and that is incredibly damaging to us and the fabric of our society to be hiding. So, yes.
I think it's important to, and this is an idea that I had a couple days ago, sorry to interrupt, about curriculum change. Like right now, you know, we need to figure out how to get anti-racist curriculum in from kindergarten and through college. So because a lot of what you know, people learn are from their own homes because their own parents are, you know, were educated with the education of white supremacy. But when they go to school, they can learn something different. I mean, we can't change their parents, but the teachers can really instill better values and education around racial dynamics and history in school. So one thing, I'm looking for a petition regarding like getting anti-racist curriculum in schools where all of history is taught, Native American history is taught, not from the lens of the colonizers from Europe, but from their own lens. You know, I used to work for the Red Hawk Native American Arts Council in New York from when I was like 19. I used to write their grants, you know, and things like that. We used to help organize their powwows. And one of the things we would do was we would go into the schools and teach Indigenous history and clear up a lot of the misconceptions. So, you know, things of that nature, like curriculum change. But also right now, while we're under lockdown, it would be great if we can get some parents, white parents specifically, but also other non-Black parents and also Black parents to commit to studying certain books, certain texts with children that are written for children. It would be nice if we can get a list going, like who can commit to this, get a study group going where parents can talk to each other, like on Zoom, about how it's going. We're teaching this anti-racist curriculum to our children now, and these are the books where, you know, and I'm struggling with this or whatever. So I think that will be something that will be a great call to action to start educating, because the kids are turning on the TV and are going on Twitter and Instagram and they're seeing what's going on. And most of them, you know, the Black kids understand, but most of the other children don't understand what's going on. And the media also too, and also their adults are spinning a narrative where it's like, oh, those Black people don't know how to act. They're rioting, they're looting, you know, they're animals. And then it continues a narrative that the parents were taught and that their parents were taught, and back on, you know, till, you know, to the 17th, 16th century. And so we can get like an anti-racist curriculum going and passed around. We can start to educate children. Okay, this is happening now because of, and this is how, you know, you hold space for that, you know, for your your Black classmates or whatever, you know. So that was my idea that I had a couple of days ago.
It's a great
Beautiful,
idea.
thank you.
It's a great idea.
So do we have Donna? Donna, did you ever make it back in? Donna?
I see you too, Lisa.
Yes.
So have you been
Hello.
able to do your secretarial skills?
I have.
You're
okay,
amazing.
Can you please put into the chat a list of the ideas that have bubbled up in this conversation, so that in our next step, people can choose the ideas that resonate with them and put their names, their contact information, and the things that resonate with them into the chat, so that the people who had the ideas can reach out to them and form their bubbles.
You need to say that again. That was a lot.
I just need you to put the name.
I got what you said.
Yeah.
The difficulty is that because I have no power, I'm on my phone and laptop.
Oh,
right.
so
wow,
still have no power.
your dedication is
Hence
amazing.
your purpleness.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll do the best
Plan
we
B.
can, though. Thanks anyway.
We're good at Plan B.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I think at this moment, though, we need to give like Beautiful energy to Donna.
Yay,
She's been transcribing
Donna.
every single word. Well, I don't know, every other word. Thank you for being here.
Hardly, but
Lisa, you had a question.
what I can do is get it in there somehow.
Okay, if you could do as much as you can while Lisa's talking, and I'll see if I can fill in the blanks. That would be fabulous.
There you go.
Thank you.
So I'm going to speak my own truth right now. And I imagine as I say this, other people might kind of feel the same way, given that it's late in the evening, but also, and like, you know, it's been a week, right? And it's been a day. I get overwhelmed with all the ideas and all the resources and all the books and all the, and it's difficult sometimes with, you know, kind of the onslaught of all of this. I'm like, you know, it gets my head spinning and it gets to feel like overwhelm. And I don't want to be bogged down in overwhelm. And I don't want to see any of us get bogged down in overwhelm. So I'm not sure how to pitch out, like, how do we whittle things down, or how do we get, like, how do we narrow things down so that we can take action? Like, you know, aside from, I feel like maybe the top thing for everybody of our 3 actions should be to vote.
Yes. Yes.
But, and then like maybe take 2 or 3 or something, you know, that seem like at first maybe relatively easy, but, you know, if we're able to circle back around to some of these things, because like I've got all these notes that I've been writing down and all these ideas, like at this point, my brain is just shutting down and it feels like too much. And so I want this to be much more proactive, and productive. So I'm, you know, and I don't know how to do that right now. I don't have the bandwidth, but I do have the ability to speak to this as my reality. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. So to speak on that, after every expansion, which we're in right now, we're like, the funnel is really wide right now. We're cultivating ideas. And we have been sitting here for 2.5 hours together, and we're keenly aware of the time. There's going to be a contraction after this, and reward yourself with that. That is actually in the rejoicing. That's when you're going to inculcate, when you're going to take all this information that we're having and like really feel it in your body, and something's going to come up, something's going to arise, and you're going to want to reach out to one of us. So that might be how the bubble starts. So first and foremost, don't beat yourself up for not doing enough. You're doing it already. Do more when the moment arises, and it will happen. And we will hold you accountable. We're here. We got your back. Okay?
But in a way, this was born out of the, you know, 85 things people can do to combat racism, and another 50 that Obama.org put out. It's like, there's so much. It's like, how do you narrow into something? And so this was born as, how do we get now 39 people to all do something together, right? And so I had thought, and this is my bad, that there was a poll thing on Zoom. But it's not here, and so I wanted to put a poll and let everybody vote on, like, what's the number one thing, and we can all agree to, you know, even if it's not our number one thing, at least we all do that. And I'm not saying don't do all the other things too, right, that you want to do, but just the one thing that we all vote the most, that's the thing that we'll all commit to doing. And so, so I can't do that on this. There's a suggestion that we do it on the Facebook group, but I don't want to let people leave until we've come up with something.
Ooh, I'm sorry, but I'm hearing the clock tick.
So let's see a show of hands. So, so if the idea of we all write our local, county, and state elected officials and police for the 3 things that I talked about earlier as the thing that we all decide we're going to do, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Corinna.
Go to the next page.
I'm going to the next page.
Can we vote more than once? And
yes.
So just to be sure, because maybe some people aren't sure if like what else is coming. And I know we talked about everything probably, but just putting that out there.
Sean Bontempo.
Hi, Sean.
God damn, I love you. Sorry, shout out, my son. I see your hands raised. Keep them up. Casey, Jennifer, I saw your hands up. Mitch, thank you. All right. I see you, Ivan, Ross. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we will put all that in the chat.
All right, everybody who wants to say yes to the forming those bubbles through the template that Annabelle talked about, to talk up to our friends about how they can get more involved in working for social justice, raise your hand.
Beautiful. Lisa, Bob, Jennifer, I see you guys. Rob, Rachel, rock on. Beautiful. Sean, are you raising your hand? Awesome. Thank you, guys. Excellent. Excellent. All right, next bubble.
What else was there? There was the
bystander
training.
Bystander training. Yeah. Folks, raise your hands. Bystander training is going to be online. It's going to be virtual. It's going to be through here. We're going to make it crazy affordable. Thank you all so much. Tracy, I love you. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Leslie, I see you. Thank you, Kelly. Iva, Bob, I see everyone. Abigail, are you raising your hand, love? For bystander training? Yes. Thank you. I see you, Maureen. I see you guys, Lisa, Corinna, Jennifer. Thank you.
Well, that's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, you guys rock.
Was there something on lobbying our educational leadership, principals, school boards about the curriculum, the books, the hiring practices, the fact that I didn't know what the Tulsa massacre was until 6 months ago. My brother over there is struggling. He didn't know either. He went to the same school as I did.
I see you guys. And Amaku, thank you so much for bringing that up.
That is so important. It is so important because, I mean, for me, where I'm at, you know, people talk about voting and whatever. If we don't change people's minds through education, then us voting because we know something is not going to make a difference with them because they still not going to know. And then their children are going to come up not knowing. And then we have the same patterns repeating. So education.
I love your passion.
Yeah, we gotta educate, you know.
Would you be willing right here, right now, and be a full yes to.
I would love everybody to, like, you know, just understand that politics is not going to solve, you know, everything if people don't have their minds made over. You know what I'm saying? Because we've had politics for a long time, you know what I mean? But people's hearts and minds have not changed, and we need to work on that, and education, you know, and awareness and all that stuff. So please support the education initiative, especially for our children, because this can't happen again, you know, when they're adults. So.
Thank you.
All right, so it looks like bystander training was the runaway winner for something that we're all going to commit to doing, and that's beautiful. So that's the next step is going to be on Laura and I to continue to chase down the facilitators. Apparently, according to the arranger, they've lined up the quote-unquote best facilitator in the country to do this for us, which is fantastic. And Sahar, did you have a hand up for a question or comment?
Yeah, I wanted to also add on the education because it's very, very close to my heart. I'm raising Black kids in America, and not just ordinary Black kids that they don't have a fixed identity because the mother is immigrant and all that complexities. So the issue of fixing education is a very, very deep one. I have been very actively involved, not in a typical PTA. Again, pardon, I speak unfiltered. That's the kind of human I am. The issue is that when we are talking about solving it, we are trying to backfit minority, indigenous, diversity to meet certain standards. And that's where things fall apart. We need to understand authenticity, and I don't see it. I don't see it even in the diversity training. And the other issue, the inclusion, the definition of inclusion needs to change. I'm speaking my truth. I have been in this community with this school for 5 years, except for people that they have been my friends. My kids rarely got invited to birthday parties. It's as simple as that. You're not included. So basically, we can talk about inclusion, but what will happen is that people that they don't feel comfortable or they are afraid that they may not say the right thing naturally exclude people that they don't look the same or they don't speak the same. So it's that feeling of not being welcome. And education, it's very, very deep, and it's at the root of this. And I don't have the answer for it, but I salute anybody that can figure it out.
Thank you for that. And yeah, that could be another bubble that we put. But before it gets too late, it's already after 10. Appreciate you guys all hanging in. Can everybody please put their name and favorite contact into the chat so that we can put together a mailing list to stay together. We might do a Facebook group for those of us who are on Facebook, but emails also for maybe a mailing list so that we can get the information about the bystander training out to everybody, and that people can form their other bubbles around things like what Sahar was just talking about around the educational aspects, and what Annabelle was talking about with the templates and the pods around friends, and whatever people want to do with the writing to their elected officials and police leadership. And we can continue the conversation virtually. So please put your information on there. And if you can also add what some of your favorite ideas were to that as well, we'll call all of that out of the chat.
Yeah.
And figure it out.
Yeah, and we'll leave the chat open until what time?
I got nowhere else to go.
We'll leave the chat open until it feels complete, but we really want to honor your time. And whew, I knew it was going to be more than I expected, but I really didn't expect this. So you like measured beyond my expectations.
Yeah, thank you everybody for showing up and staying on past the point. We still have 36 people on. That's pretty impressive. So if anybody hasn't put their name on the chat, or if anybody has put their name on the chat but hasn't put which ideas they have gravitated towards the most, please do that at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. We love you. You're doing an awesome
job. Love you, Rachel. Love you, Corinna.
Awesome.
Mr.
I'm blown away by how good this was. You guys did an awesome job.
Thank you, Rob.
You guys did too. Thank you. Thank you.
You need a haircut.
You look like Mr. Softy.
Hey, at least I shaved.
Is there anybody else who has just a passionate plea that would like to throw them, conclude our time together with? I'm just gazing upon all of your eyes, and I'm so grateful. But if you have anything you really want to share, please give I call these moose ears, just to bring levity. Okay. Wow.
I have something I would like to share. I'll put a link for it in the chat, but Verso Books is doing a free ebook for End of Policing. It's a very good read to see what we can go through to kind of disengage the police state.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Hey, Peter, can I have an ask of you? Are you in a state that you can actually turn your camera on? Because I want to see your face. Are you able
I have to figure out, one second. I'm in a allow Zoom to, okay, I have to go change my camera settings. But yes, I will do this. Give me 1 second.
Okay. All right, we'll stay on for another minute.
And by the way, Jennifer Elmore, I just want to say hi to you. I remember you fondly from Love Light, and it's awesome to see your face.
Yeah, these are the moments. So
thank you so much for doing this, y'all. I really needed to tune into a community. I'm out in the middle of the woods outside of Charlottesville, and I just am so grateful. Thank you, everyone that came on.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm glad that we're able to do Zoom. Hey.
Yeah, thank you for allowing yourself to be seen. I see you, Peter. Thank you. Gosh. So just in this final moment, I really just want to gaze upon you guys, and I invite you to do the same. And just, and there's the rain. Just deep, deep love and gratitude. and know that these faces that are before me that I haven't seen in so long, I long for you guys. My heart longs for you. And so grateful for your presence here. Thank you.
And thank you, Corinna, and thank you, Amaku, for speaking. You guys rocked it.
Yeah.
That was better than I could ever have dreamed. And you guys just showed up and knocked the cover off the ball. So thank you, Corinna. Thank you, Amaku. And I know Ron can hear us where he is with his community. So let's just all send a prayer of love to him and to his community as they're mourning the loss of what I imagine to be a young man. His mother,
it's going to be an aftershock.
is not an old woman.
Yeah, it's going to be an aftershock in our community for sure. So, yeah, you guys, this is like those old calls when you're on with your boyfriend, you just don't want to say goodnight, you know, goodnight, or your girlfriend. You're like, I love you, goodbye.
No, you hang up first.
You hang up first. Yeah, as you feel called, call us. We are here. You know how to reach us. Please reach out. I want big aftershocks. And we love you very, very much. Good night.
Love you.
Love you.
Love you so much.
Love you so much. Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you guys. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Love you.
Bye.
Big love to everyone. Big love.
Big love.
Thank you.
Big love to everyone.
We got to meet Sean tonight.
We did. I love you, Sean.
I'm sorry I couldn't be here sooner, but the one thing I would really love to say is, you know, Richmond just got where I live nearby has just been they've just accepted the plea that everyone's been, you know, resounding for days and days and days, that we need a review board of our police department, and they're finally going to do it, and they're taking down a bunch of these Confederate statues that have been just littering this city for such a long time. And
Wow.
So tonight, before I got on this call, I was working with my significant other's family to get some food over to the protests, and they've been very iffy on going, and so have I, to be going to the protests physically, just because it's a really weird time to be protesting, you know, with everything that's going on right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic, but it's not like we can just silence ourselves. So we're trying to do everything we can, but that bit of news that our police board is finally going up for review and everyone's going to be, you know, being looked at heavily with serious scrutiny is really, really good, I think, for just the health of our entire community. And I hope that going forward for this community that you guys have assembled here today, something at least along the lines of what has happened here can come forth and grow and blossom. That you guys have been like amazing. From everything I've heard, I know I got here late, like I said, but from everything I've heard, like you guys seem genuinely concerned and caring about everything you've spoke about, and yeah, I'm just excited to see where this goes. So I'm glad you guys got to meet me, but I'm really just glad I got to hear from all of you. So
yeah, thank you, babe, for being here. And and there's a strong group here. So many of your friends were here tonight, and to speak to this, and this goes for the few remaining. Like, we're here to help the exponential product happen. Like, this is just it's like a pebble in the pond. It's going to ripple out. So please tell your friends that they can reach out to us so we can help make that exponential factor happen.
of course.
Yeah, and I'm calling you after this call.
Okay.
And I love how crazy progressive Peter is. Wow. He's like,
yeah, he's like,
he reminds me of me when I was
emotional, like V for Vendetta. Get rid of
all
the police. Like,
I was also I'm also very much of that spirit. I keep a lot of it quiet now, but I see there's only a few people here. But I was really plugged in and active in radical anarchist communities in my time in university, and yeah, I wanted to smash the whole police state and disband the police. And yeah, I've kind of the pendulum has swung back to a little more holistic view, but you know, there still is the idealistic part of me that wants to live in a world where every community polices themselves without an oppressive police force. And yeah, and so much of true anarchy is not about just chaos and mayhem, but which it gets a rep for, but people really just taking care of themselves first, the self-responsibility, and then reaching out once that's covered to their family, their community, and like these widening circles where people really take care and provide what's needed for their community, which you guys are a great example of. And thank you.
Well, thank you, babe. It's great to see you, Jacob. It's great to hear you.
Thanks. Thanks.
There are two really powerful tools that Tantra has taught me, and I think we all here can agree. Even my son has heard me say it, not even know where it's coming from, and they are, thank you for taking care of yourself, which I have been saying so much this week to so many people who are feeling so many different degrees of overwhelm, just absolute overwhelm, fatigue, exhaustion, you name it. And yeah, so thank you all for taking care of yourselves. And with that comes like, take care of yourselves. And the other is yes and, which comes from, comedy improv. And Sean, you taught me this. And yes and, there is so much out there that we think that it is black and white, and it's not. It's black, and white. Yes, and. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So if you use two phrases moving forward, it's thank you for taking care of yourself, and yes, and.
Goes on and on and on and on.
And on and on and on.
The beat don't stop until the break of dawn.
Yeah, really, we could use some music tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sticking with us, you guys. You freaking amaze me.
Hi, Danielle. Big smile.
Yeah.
I love it.
Are we still recording?
Yeah, you are.
I say peace out on the recording.